You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author, Christina Patterson, and the columnist for the article, Ali Miraj. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Metro leads with the rescue mission at the lake in Solihull, where 4 children fell through the ice earlier today. That's also the top story for the Express. Their simple headline, Lake Horror. Here's the Telegraph, children in frozen lake plunge. It's also the main concern for the Mirror. The Mail leads with the same story, the headline there, horror on the frozen lake. The Eye reports there could be talks between nurses and ministers in an attempt to avert their possible strike later this week. While The Guardian says ministers are under fire over plans to use the military to keep some services running as the wave of winter strikes gets underway. Despite being knocked out of the World Cup, The Sun says England football fans want manager Gareth Southgate to stay on until the Euros in 2 years' time. And The Star has the story of a cat who was regarded as a lucky mascot for England at the World Cup. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Ali Miraj. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Eye, first of all, and the political story, the strikes that are scheduled for this week, but hopes that they could possibly be stalled, hopefully, that negotiations, although they haven't been face-to-face with the government, that there might be a glimmer of hope that they won't go ahead. Ali?
Well, this is positive news, but still this dispute's ongoing, and unless both sides sit down, it's unclear whether this issue can be resolved. I mean, what is clear is that Pat Cullen, the General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, was coming out with some really bizarre language the other day, saying that the reason why Steve Barclay, the health minister, was not meeting with her was because she was a woman representing a profession that was 90% women, and that had she been a man representing a male profession, she feels that it would be very different, which is slightly odd given the fact that we've got strikes across the public sector, from ambulance workers to rail workers to now postal workers as well. So I don't think it's a sex issue particularly here, and I think it's slightly bizarre that she came out with that. Look, the RCN's, Royal College of Nursing, starting point of an increase of about anywhere between 17 and 19% is not realistic. I think that they realise that it's an opening point for negotiation, but it's not a basis for a serious discussion with any minister or anyone else. The reality also is that there's an independent pay review body that's come up with 3%. Now, the point here is that independent pay review bodies are there for a reason. Now, 3% seems pretty unreasonable, I think, in the current environment, but so does 17 to 19%. So both parties have to sit around the table, try and work something out. I think the Health Secretary's been quite firm that he doesn't want to engage in direct discussions because of that independent pay review body. But I think both parties are going to have to see some sense here and keep the talks going to try and avert strike action.
Well, according to the Eye, nurses and ministers both say they want negotiations in order to avert the strike, Christina.
Well, according to this story, yes, but there have been a number of other stories over the weekend that have implied that ministers are actually refusing to sit down with nurses. And they keep saying, oh, but the pay review body has made its recommendations. Well, for a start, the pay review body only offers advice. And also it made those recommendations before everything blew up in terms of cost of living crisis, soaring costs of energy bills and so on. So, I mean, nobody could possibly take seriously a 4% or 3% recommendation, given that nurses have, in real terms, lost, the RCN are arguing, about £4,000 to £5,000 a year in real terms since 2010. And I do think nurses, they have a very strong case for industrial action. They take it very reluctantly, but they paid the price of COVID. We clapped them on the streets. They worked incredibly hard in often unbearable conditions. Many nurses ended up, as many healthcare workers did, actually with various forms of post-traumatic stress disorder, because it was, we just have to look back on what it was like for them, often with inadequate PPE, but otherwise, strapped up in masks and gowns and very uncomfortable clothing for 12-hour shifts in extremely stressful circumstances. And the thanks they have from this government is that they won't even sit down with them. I think the government are playing hardball. I agree with Ali that the 19% demand is unrealistic, but generally demands are unrealistic. They're a starting point and you go down from that point. But I think the government is trying to take a kind of macho stance, and I'm not sure how well that will go down with the public, because the public generally, I think about 65% of people support nurses on this strike. They don't support all striking workers to the same degree, but generally speaking, at this point, the support for most striking workers is higher than the lack of support. That may change, but I think the government does need to sit down and stop pretending that it's not, that there's no room for negotiation, because of course there is.
Yeah, well, the RCN definitely laid the gauntlet down and put the ball firmly in the court of the government by saying that, we're prepared to negotiate, and they weren't even attaching a figure to that negotiation. Let's move on to the Daily Telegraph and moving on to another set of strikes, the rail strikes. And we have the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, saying that the disruption means that many people across the country will be left with no choice but to have a virtual Christmas with their relatives, Ali.
Well, this is miserable, really. I mean, we had a disruptive Christmas last year when people had to do Zoom calls with their relatives, and we're looking at a similar thing this year. Now, this is what the Transport Secretary is implying here. Again, I mean, this dispute's been going on for months now. Mick Lynch and his colleagues at the RMT have got a certain amount of public support. I understand where they're coming from. Of course, they want to increase their pay, as Christina has alluded to. It's not just nurses, but across the public sector, a lot of people feel that their real wages have been decreasing for the past decade. So it's quite understandable that they want to take strike action and try and do what they can. However, it's the worst possible time. I mean, look at the weather that we've got right now. We are in the midst of a recession, according to the Bank of England, which also might increase interest rates this week. So this is the worst possible time for this action, particularly at Christmas time, which is the one period of the year when people want to try and get together with their families and try and put a very difficult period, at least try and forget about it for a few days. So I also think that the rail unions need to realize and be honest about the fact that rail practices and working practices need to modernize and change. There's 20% decrease in usage on the railways since the pandemic. So business as usual is not really going to work. So part of it's pay, part of it's working practices, but everyone needs to be sensible and reasonable here. And the government can't be held to ransom, and the rest of us can't also be held to ransom because the rail unions are digging their heels in. I think Rishi Sunak's going to be playing hardball on this. He's already announced that he wants a minimum threshold of service to be introduced in legislation if strike action is going to take place. And in certain areas, really critical areas, he wants to introduce a complete ban on strike action as well. So I don't think this story is going to end here.
Christina, the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, he's saying that despite being offered a pay deal, he's accusing the union bosses of being ideologically committed to industrial action. Do you think there's some truth in that?
I don't think they are ideologically committed. I mean, remember that when people strike, they lose pay. And that is pretty tough when everybody's struggling as much as they are at the moment. So I think, there certainly have been plenty of union bosses in the last 20 years or so who have been ideologically committed. I don't personally think that Mick Lynch is particularly ideologically committed. And in fact, his board are kind of more hardline on these issues than he is. But I do agree with Ali that things do change and working practices do need to change. Now, I do think they are not paid enough. I couldn't say whether the pay offer they were offered, which I think was about 8% over 2 years, was reasonable or not. It doesn't sound wildly unreasonable to me. But I think my understanding is that the union were recommending that it be turned down because of the suggestions of reform to working practices. Now, unfortunately, everything has to be reformed. Fortunately or unfortunately, some things are to do with progress, like automation of trains. I mean, there are plenty of driverless trains at the moment, and they don't seem to be putting life and limb in danger. So I think there probably does have to be a bit of give and take here. I think the government's hardline stance is unhelpful. I don't think the nurses are being hardline. I think they are being conciliatory. I'm not getting quite the same impression from the rail workers. And as Ali says, this will be absolutely miserable for so many people. Broadly, I support most of the strikes at the moment, because I think people are not seeing their pay increase in line with inflation and the cost of living. But I do also think this is really going to make life miserable for so many people.
Okay.
I was just in touch with a friend just before this programme started who's having colleagues to stay this week because they can't even get home to their families because of the rail strikes.
Christina, we must leave it there for the moment. Christina and Ali, thank you so much. We are going to take a break, and coming up, they think it's all over, but is it? We'll look at Gareth Southgate's efforts to boost the nation's morale. That's coming up next. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Christina Patterson and Ali Miraj. There they both are. Ali, I'll come to you first in this section. And this story in The Guardian, really talking about the implications of the government using military cover for the strikes. And obviously, personnel will have to not have their Christmas breaks. And military sources are saying that officers are warning about the potential impact of the morale on troops who've also seen declining real terms pay.
I think that's right, Gillian. You know, if you've got a problem, the first lever you reach for is the military. But the military can't be a panacea to every strike that's going to be taking place. I mean, good for them for stepping up. There's going to be a Cobra meeting that's going to be held tomorrow to discuss the implications of military personnel getting involved. 1,000 of them are being earmarked to do this, at border staff, driving ambulances, and other things, along with civil servants, 1,000 civil servants, and also volunteers. So, look, it's not an ideal solution, but the country's got to be kept moving in some way. And if you've got a problem, you call in the military, because they are the experts. They always step up for their country, and they are logistically on top of things. But you can't use that. You have to use it sparingly. And as it says, the Guardian point there, it's making the point that these military personnel have also suffered real terms pay cuts. So they can't exactly be too happy either. But, you know, cometh the army. To step up and help keep the country on the straight and narrow. Yeah,
and as you say, that first Cobra meeting will take place tomorrow. Let's move on to the Metro, Christina, and this story about Strep A tests selling out. Extremely worrying for parents of children in that age bracket.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Strep A phenomenon is horrific for parents. And my heart, I'm not a parent, but my heart goes out to them, having had now nearly 3 years of COVID, to have this infection apparently spreading so fast, being so virulent, and tragically having killed, I think, about 15 children by now.
16.
The thing is that, sorry, how many? 16 did you say? 16, how terrible. These tests are not necessarily reliable, though, and we have been assured by the NHS that there now are many more supplies of antibiotics. So the important thing, of course, is to get to a doctor or to contact the NHS phone line if your child is ill. But obviously a very, very worrying time, and awful for the NHS as well to have this on top of all the other pressures it faces at the moment.
Ali, the swab kits apparently are changing hands for more than £100. That's according to The Observer, but their accuracy is uncertain, so the advice still is to get a diagnosis from a GP.
That's right, and you've got an increase in cases here that's been caused by the fact that we were in lockdown, and understandably in lockdown. I'm not a lockdown skeptic. I understood why we were in lockdown, but obviously you're going to have kids that have not built up immunity during that period, and that's where you're having an increase in Strep A. And obviously parents have to be, and parents are clearly very worried at the moment, are going to have to be looking out for signs of rash and other things so that they can act very quickly. I mean, there is also in certain areas a shortage of antibiotics, although that's being denied by the government, who's saying that supply chains are working effectively. But it's also being reported in the Metro that amoxicillin is running short, particularly in parts of Cheshire. So, look, it's not an ideal situation, but parents need to be mindful and vigilant and take swift action where required.
Absolutely. Now, we couldn't finish the paper review without talking about the football. And The Sun is saying, despite England coming home early, fans, it seems, still want Gareth Southgate to continue in his role? Christina.
Well, everybody loves Gareth. I'm not a football fan. I would like Gareth Southgate to resign from his job and run the country instead, because he's such a decent, nice man. He's so sensible. He listens to people. He has such great integrity. And of course, you know, it's very sadly, Harry Kane, unfortunately, apparently let the country down. But I don't think that's an unforgivable sin. And I think it's just that kind of steady, moderate approach that's collegiate, building team spirit that we could do with the country, and that we've had so little of in recent years from this ghastly government and its predecessors. So obviously, I am no expert on football tactics, but what he has very evidently done is built a team that has great loyalty to each other, great competence, some great players, and I hope he stays.
And that's from someone who's not a football fan. Ali, do you think he should stay?
Yeah, I do think he should. I echo what Christina says. I do think he's decent. I think he's really built team morale, camaraderie. He's built a great squad. I think he was personally quite wounded in June by that defeat to Hungary, 4-0 defeat, and the reaction that the fans gave him. I mean, obviously people were very upset about the result, but they really rounded on Southgate, and I don't think he's forgotten that. And look, being an England manager, there's nowhere to hide. Takes an impact on your personal toll on your health and probably time spent with family. So he's got to spend a bit of time deciding what he wants to do. His contract's up in 2024. We hope that he takes us through to the next Euros. But it's a personal decision for him. I mean, frankly, the others being potentially lined up, I don't think anyone is better than Southgate, and I think he's done really, really well. And I think they also played very well last night. I mean, the margins are very fine at the top level of international football, and we feel for Harry Kane. You know, he tried his best, and these things happen.
He did. They all did. They all did. Ali and Christina, thank you so much.